wondering whether, in fact, they shouldn't consider something like communism. Without being aware, perhaps, of what was going on in Russia or the modes and methods of Joseph Stalin, they saw democracy really not being fair to huge numbers of people. What do? System seems to have broken down. If it goes on year after year after year and you don't seem to be climbing out of the pit that's been dug, what does one do? This is the very time that in the McCarthy era, people were looking back to when they said so-and-so had been a member of the Communist Party. The 1930s. The Great Depression is when many people thought that that might be some kind of an alternative. It wasn't that right after World War II, a lot of people flocked to join the Communist Party. It was that a number of them had been members at one time or another of a Communist Party or the Communist Party in the United States in the 1930s, to a significant degree as a result of the Great Depression. Let's take a look at this inaugural. This is a day of national consecration. What does consecration suggest?
Set apart.
Set apart. What else does it suggest?
Making something sacred.
Yes, making something sacred. To put it apart. This day is put apart, and it is to some degree made sacred. Now, we all know that there's no religious test in the United States. We talk about the separation of church and state. You don't have to belong to any particular religion to hold any civil office of any kind. But Roosevelt starts out by saying this is a day of national consecration. And I am certain that my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our nature impels. Nice, strong verb there, impels. Not compels, but impels. Compels would perhaps suggest some kind of disciplinary force, but this is impelling it. Candor. What does candor mean? Yes, frankness. And as you look elsewhere in this address, you're going to see the word frank or frankly a couple times. You're going to see frankly just another line or two down. Frank and frankly are wonderful words. They're overused today, I think. So for example, if in a debate or if in an interview someone turns to you and says, quite frankly, what do you think is coming next? Yeah, close to it. Maybe not insulting you, but they're about to give a rebuttal or put you down, something like that. It's become a tag, quite frankly. It's annoying to me in some ways because it's dismissive. But the word candid, comes from a word originally meaning white. Voltaire's little novella Candide comes from the same word, meaning to be frank about the situation of the world. And where does the word candid occur in a great American document? Yes, good for you. Yes. Love of language, love of words, candid. This is preeminently the time to speak the truth. So truth, candor, frankness, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. So right away you see there's a theme of candor, honesty, frankness, direct dealing. What we today would call transparency, a word that itself has become overused, I'm afraid, in many ways. But here Roosevelt is calling on this as a time to speak the truth. This great nation will endure as it has endured. A little example of polyptyton there. Endure as it has endured, will revive, and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Very famous line from this address. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. A perfect hexameter line in poetry, by the way. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Hear the stresses? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It just falls off the tongue in a very rhythmic way. And it becomes really the most famous line of the whole address. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror. This is now an apostrophe or apposition to that fear, meaning it's elaborating on what it is. It's giving a larger definition of it. You see the dash that comes after itself, which sets up this apposition. Dashes or parentheses often set up an apposition. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror. And there we have a kind of triad, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. All right, here's another theme of the speech. You hear the words retreat and advance, and it makes you think of what? War, yes. Makes you think of a battle. And that's one of the themes that runs throughout the entire address. It's a fight. It's a fight against something. When you are facing very tough odds and you want people to rally behind you, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say to them, don't worry, it's not a fight, we'll get through this, we'll muddle through. That doesn't work very well. No, I know Kelly's shaking her head. No, you tell them it's a fight. This is what Churchill told the people of England when they were basically being cut off from the continent and the Nazis were breathing down their neck and bombing them every day. It's a fight. William James, here at Harvard, one of the essays he wrote was called The Moral Equivalent of War, in which James talks very eloquently about the fact that sometimes when you are having a battle against something that does not call for the military, but it calls for mobilization at a certain level, a certain collective level, it is a moral equivalent of war. And it causes all of the energies you can muster to be collected into one. So in the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson launched a program called The What on Poverty? The War on Poverty. The War on Drugs. Now, these are not always successful, but it is the rhetoric of battle. We saw this in Lincoln in the House Divided speech, too. We saw this in Du Bois in his speech to the Niagara movement. It's a tried and true resource. It has to be used carefully, but it's very often effective. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness, there's that word frank again, only now it isn't frankly, it's frankness, and vigor has met with that understanding and supported the people themselves, which is essential to victory. I am convinced that you will again give that support to leadership in these critical days. Now, he says leadership. Why doesn't he say me? Yes, Larry said, well, might not have caught that on the microphone, but Larry says he's going to need support to pass his policies. He cannot do it on his own. Others are going to have to work with him. Now, Roosevelt worked very hard. He worked so hard that some of the things he wanted to do were declared unconstitutional. He wanted to pack the Supreme Court, pack it. He wanted to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court so he could name additional justices and get a clear majority. He didn't succeed in doing that. And he's been criticized for attempting to have done that. But the system has checks and balances, and he was not able to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court. But he was able to pass important legislation. I think there is an enthymeme lurking somewhere at the end of that paragraph. I'm not quite sure exactly what the syllogism would be, but I think it would be something like, in the past time of crisis, people have lent their support to leadership. When they do that, then we are able to solve the crisis. So he's calling on the people there. I am convinced that you will again give that support to leadership in these critical days. in such a spirit on my part and on yours. So now he is creating a sense of solidarity. He's already in the first few paragraphs brought together himself as a new chief executive with the entire audience that he is addressing. He's not divided them into Republicans or Democrats or Northerners or Southerners or anything. He's speaking to the entire country. They concern, meaning the difficulties concern, thank God. And that aside is, I think, part of the somewhat submerged but ever-present religious sense in this address. Again, not identifying a particular religion, but a sense of the sacred. They concern, thank God, only material things. Now this is pretty amazing in some respect. You're speaking to people, they're listening to you on the radio. This was broadcast on the radio. There's an old film of it, kind of chopped up into different parts you can still see. Not televised, of course, television hadn't been invented yet, but people listening on the radio. You're poor, you're struggling. You've just been told that they concern, thank God, only material things. That's a bit of a risk. Values have shrunken to fantastic levels. By that he means what kind of values? It doesn't mean moral values. Yeah, monetary values, property values, stock values, values of tangible things, values of securities. Taxes have risen. Our ability to pay has fallen. I love those short sentences. It's very interesting use of variety in sentence. Values have shrunken to fantastic levels. Taxes have risen. Our ability to pay has fallen. Boom, boom, boom. Government of all kinds is faced by serious curtailment of income. The means of exchange are frozen in the currents of trade. Now this is an interesting image. Anyone here an economics major? Okay, Joel, put you on the spot again. You're being very brave today. What does it mean when it was said during the Great Recession that the credit markets were frozen or locked up?
Basically, it meant that no one really wanted to lend money to people because they were afraid that they weren't going to make any return on that.
Right.
And so investors who wanted to make projects that would further the economy couldn't get the money to invest in those projects.
Right, they're frozen. The word used is frozen. And Roosevelt knows that word. That word's been around for a long, long time. When the credit markets are frozen, you can't lend money. No one wants to lend money. It's hard to borrow money. What does that do to a system based on capital? It's done. No, it's not done. It's mortally wounded, perhaps, or wounded, shall we say, maybe not mortally wounded. It's in trouble. It's in trouble. The credit market is locked up. Sometimes the word used is locked, sometimes frozen. It's frozen. You can't do anything. This essentially puts the brakes on capitalism. It puts the brakes on capital. It's a great threat. The withered leaves of industrial enterprise. Now here's a nice use of metaphor. The withered leaves, and what does withered leaves suggest to you as an image? Death. You get an image of withered leaves blowing down a deserted street or maybe a deserted factory yard, something like that. The withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side. Farmers find no markets for their produce. The savings of many years in thousands of families are gone. And that was true. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, meaning just getting by, living. And an equally great number toil with little return. Now, the language here is quite marvelous because he's not really pulling any punches, but he is telling something that's a hard fact in language that's pretty direct. But he's not saying people are starving, people might die. He's not using that kind of language. He's using the grim problem of existence. Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. Yet our distress comes from no failure of substance. We are stricken by no plague of locusts. Where's that image come from? Bible. Yes, it comes from the Old Testament, plague of locusts. Well, in other words, it's not something natural and external. It's no failure of substance. Compared with the perils which our forefathers conquered because they believed and were not afraid. They believed and were not afraid. We have still much to be thankful for. And that believed and not afraid is part of one of the other themes of this address, which is that in any country or group of people under severe stress, facing great problems, you want to actuate a sense of belief and hope because it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people are energized and think they can solve a problem, are the chances greater than they solve it than if they're depressed and desultory? Of course they are. Of course they're greater. It's a matter of, well, more than just tone. It's a matter of psychological and collective attitude. And this is what Roosevelt is trying to instill. He begins the next sentence, compared with the perils which our forefathers conquered because they believed and were not afraid, we have still much to be thankful for. And there's a cause and effect there. If you believe and are not afraid, did the forefathers succeed? Yes, they conquered. That's the word that's used, conquered. Again, a military image. Nature still offers her bounty, and human efforts have multiplied it. Plenty is at our doorstep, but a generous use of it languishes in the very sight of the supply. In other words, nature itself has not abandoned us. There has been no plague of locusts. Where has the problem been? Next paragraph. Primarily this is because, and now what is he doing in this paragraph when he begins primarily this is because? Not only define it, not only explain it, but primarily this is because?
He just used language of democracy, and now he's using language of monarchy, and to attribute blame to this issue.
Well, why monarchy?
Because they had absolute power and abused it.
Okay, but what does the rulers of the exchange mean?
Those in charge of the financial...
Yes, yes. Those in charge of the financial machinery of the country. Those in charge of the markets. Those who have been directing them, and those who permitted various financial practices. Not only permitted them, encouraged them. Absolutely. This is because the rulers of the exchange of mankind's goods have failed. Joel, you know, you studied in economics, I'm sure, that there is such a thing as market failure. A market failure. Markets are wonderful things. We wouldn't be where we are without them, but they aren't absolutely perfect, and sometimes they fail. And in this case, the market failure was profound and prolonged. He goes farther. He doesn't just point to the rulers of the exchange. This speech gets a little tough now. Through their own stubbornness and their own incompetence, have admitted their failure and abdicated. Practices of the unscrupulous money changers, where does that image come from? Yes, that's from the New Testament in the Bible. The money changers are cleared out, stand indicted in the court of public opinion. This is repeated at the beginning of the next paragraph. The money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. This is blame. This is identifying the problem, and it's blaming. It's not naming names. It's not doing that, but it's naming a group of individuals whom Roosevelt thinks bear some guilt for the economic situation. He really does. They know only the rules of a generation of self-seekers. They have no vision, and when there is no vision, the people perish. Now that's a harder allusion, but that's also biblical. It's from Proverbs, where the people have no vision, where there is no vision, the people perish. So just to think now at the beginning of this address, there's a theme of war and battle and retreat. There are religious themes. There's a theme of candor and frankness. He has identified a very specific economic problem. He has said who is responsible for it. He has tried to bring the country together. He has used imagery. He has used schemes of language. He has addressed a larger population. How many words have we read? 250, 350 maybe? 350. 400 tops. That's a lot.